Madam Secretary, I know we have an awful lot to talk about, and you've been so kind and sharing, giving me some of your time in a meeting with you. But I think on the record, I'd like to have a few things that we can talk about on the record and make sure that we do. First of all, with all this going on, I know there's a lot of talk about the bank and this and that. And I think it was Senator Hagerty was talking about over the 250. I've been talking and to a few of our colleagues, and we were just wondering if it's, and you said you haven't gotten to that point yet. So let's say 90% of my West Virginia depositors are under 250. And now they're going to pay a little bit higher premiums, I guess, or higher bank fees, or somebody's going to pay. Is the bank absorbing that, or will it be passed on to the consumer?
Well, it's not obvious it would be passed on to the consumer. I suppose it could be, but may also be absorbed by it's a special one-time assessment.
If we're assuming that could happen, and maybe it could be the consumers, okay, they understand, and the bankers, I had all the community bankers in. What they believe would be unfair, they said, listen, we're in good shape. We move money around. So if we have a depositor who has $1 million, this one banker says, I'll call 3 of my friends and say, can I move 250 to you, 250 to you, and 250 to you? We do that all the time to make sure everyone's covered. That's my response. He said, that's my responsibility. Which made all the sense in the world. So I know there's a lot of tools that we already have that sometimes just bad banking practices. They all come to the conclusion they felt the San Francisco feds did not do their job. They thought they were, lax in basically what they should have enforced. There was 8 months without a risk manager at the bank, SVB, that they knew of. Is that factual?
Senator Manchin, I'm not involved. It's the Federal Reserve and California that are involved in the supervision of that bank. I'm not involved. I've read some newspaper stories about this, but this is not in the public domain, and I don't know.
Well, for the record, I think you did the right thing. We all made your decision on taking care of depositors, but not the bank bailout and not the shareholders and all that. And I think there's a clawback. You understand there's legislation for clawback.
Yes.
Because we think that there was nefarious acts by those responsible to protect themselves and the heck with their depositors and all the other people who've fallen prey to this. So we're hoping that you all can look at that and maybe give us your blessing.
Yes, certainly.
And in a 250 above, I was just going to ask you this. From 250 and above, it was, to me, the reasonability would be if I need to keep about $2 million in the bank because of payroll and inventory reasons, and I know I'm only secured at 250, I got $1,750,000 at stake. Shouldn't I be able to buy or pay a little higher bank fee to get protection up to the amount, with a cap maybe at 10, something? We've been talking, some senators have been talking back and forth. Could the FDIC, and I think they say it would take legislation.
It would take legislation.
I don't think we should do it without you all involved, showing us how to structure that. But if I could go back to my bankers and says, for those businesses you might have in even rural areas that have to keep large amounts of cash because they need that, now that they know that they're exposed, they would be the first ones to move to the bigger banks.
That's exactly right.
So they're worried about that.
Yes.
And they said, if you could offer some type of an insurance policy that they would pay for, so the $250,000, 80 to 90% in rural areas aren't going to be saddled with accommodating somebody that needs that type of protection.
I think often the uninsured depositors, especially in community banks, are local businesses that have payroll and can't manage with just
that type
within
of
the
evaluation
insured.
makes sense to you? Does it make a...
I think this is very worthwhile, for you and your colleagues to be discussing what's appropriate here, and we would be more than willing to work with you to think this through. It's worthwhile. Look, for the moment, we're trying to stabilize the situation using the tools at our disposal, but there certainly are.
Yeah, these are questions asked by reasonable people in the business.
Course.
And they're just saying,
Yes.
if you're going to do something, rather than just now saying, they think if you set a precedent now that they're expecting the feds to bail everybody out.
So
And I don't think that's what our intentions are.
I don't think that that's going to be needed. but we don't want to see contagious bank runs and a loss in confidence in our banking system, especially when the banking system is overall for the United States very sound.
When this subcommittee, hopefully we'll have Mr. Jerome Powell at the Feds telling us basically what they've been able to do since the CVB has happened as far as to enforce the oversight by the San Francisco Reserve and all the different reserves we have around the country, if they're looking at their more troubled areas, if you will.
It's been announced that Vice Chair for Supervision, Michael Barr, will do a thorough review of the supervision of this bank.
Now, now I know this is in your bailiwick, okay? I know that the White House is currently working with the EU on a limited trade agreement that will allow them to become eligible for the first half of the EV credits. What we're concerned about is, I know that the EU, and I'm fine. I said I don't have a problem with our allies. What I have a problem with is going to countries that we don't have what we would call a secure supply chain. So when we wrote the bill, we wrote it, you and I have spoken about this before, we wrote it with free trade agreements. For us to have a free trade agreement, we knew that there had to be more of a confidence that we're going to have pretty good supply chain and not be held hostage. Some of these other countries where an awful lot of the minerals come from are not in the EU. If you're trying to expand that, if the White House tries to expand that beyond, we're back in that critical situation where we have unreliable supply chains, where the Chinas, the Russias, the Irans, the North Koreans, all the different people who have nefarious activities that sometimes use unscrupulous tactics to hold those people hostage, and they've already had a pretty good stake in it. I can assure you that was not the intent of how we wrote the bill.
Senator Manchin, I understand that the intent of the bill is that we should have secure supply chains, and any agreements that we would look at, and of course we would consult closely with you and with Congress, would be meant to make sure that we are securing our supply chains as the legislation is.
Well, you've been kind. We might respectfully at times agree to disagree on some things, but at least you've been kind enough to sit down and work with me, and I appreciate that. And we want to keep that going. I think we've furnished you with the concerns we had.
Yes.
With production, sourcing critical minerals, and processing versus the manufacturing, and why we think there's a difference there, and why we think it's imperative we keep that difference. Okay. And if we don't keep that difference, then basically this material that they're considering part of the processing, which goes into the manufacturing portion, does not go into processing, and all processing is taking the rocks or the raw materials, the raw minerals, and processing them into a form, then goes into the okay. That's the differences, and we think that's very clear, and we're hopefully that before you all come out with the rule and all that, we have more input in that, or we're on the same page, because that one causes a lot of problems.
So I believe we're on the same page. We're working very hard on the rule and have said that we will get this rule out by the end of March. We're certainly trying to meet that deadline and have been consulting with you and your staff and broadly to understand.
One final question, since I haven't put the clock on myself right now, but I'm watching it very go. Don't tell on me. One final question. Knowing what we have and how critical the financial situation can be, and just what the bank thing, just that one thing, what it did to our psychic, if you will, and our whole, it could have unraveled so many things, right? With the SVB and all that started. When you don't have a financial house in order, and right now, I'd venture to say, what would you recommend that we evaluate in how we operate our government and our finances of our government right now? So we're looking at all these other things. I hear about stress testing and all the things that goes on to evaluate, are they in a critical position or not? What do you think we could do to look at how we operate here? And I want to be very clear. The way that both sides, Democrats and Republicans, are approaching the debt ceiling, there's not one person, as far as out of 100 senators, that I truly in their heart believe that we should not hold anything hostage about paying our debts or missing that or going into default. I really believe that in my heart. With that, I do not believe it's unreasonable for my friends and colleagues on the Republican side to say, can we sit down? Now, if they're going to say, I will not vote to raise the debt ceiling unless you pass this, this, and this, I would not agree. That's a wrong approach. Would we sit down and we can agree that we should be looking at these portions of our debt and how we've accumulated so much debt so fast? We know what we did with COVID. Take COVID out of the picture. We know how the rest of it, or do we know how the rest of it accumulated in such a short period of time, especially since 2001. But even look at 2013, the last 10 years, it's been unbelievable. And the projections from OBM doesn't quit. So it scares the bejesus out of me and all the trust funds. I'm hopefully that we can come to an agreement. And if you all would be receptive to considering, should we come to an agreement that we can basically look at all these things and within a 90-day period come back with some recommendations and get a vote either up or down? We're not holding anything hostage. We're voting to pay our bills. And all we've agreed on is we're going to put a bipartisan, bicameral group together to look at trust funds, to look at the different things that are very vulnerable, the same as you do with the bank when you send your examiners in.
Senator Manchin, I believe being on a fiscally sustainable course is critical for our nation, and we should sit down and have a very reasoned discussion about what's necessary to accomplish that. The president has offered to have discussions, but not with the sort of Damocles of
Vote for it, or if you don't vote for
we
this,
don't
I won't.
agree,
Yeah, no,
we're going to not pay our bills and have financial and economic chaos.
If I was capable of bringing some people together on both sides and says, listen, let's sit down and talk about what we think, that we could basically come and look at over a 3-month period to come back with a guaranteed vote on the floor if we make recommendations. You don't have to vote for it. And they think, oh, it might be too toxic. I don't care what you think. Let's look and see how we get our finances in order, because we're not right now. And knowing what happened to the bank should put all of us in a concern. Could that happen to our country?
Well, we should be stress testing our fiscal, just as we stress test banks. We should be looking at
we don't,
what
do
we
we?
think will happen in a base case and what happens
Worst case.
in alternative,
But
better and
I've been here
worse
for 12 years,
scenarios.
Madam Secretary, and I've not had that happen or anyone approach me with that. So I'm glad that you've said that, and I think that you're right on. Well, I want you to know I won't participate and will not participate in anybody holding anybody hostage. I will vote for the debt ceiling, but I would vote with the understanding that at least we can have a conversation with a guaranteed vote in 90 days on changes we think need to be made. And I think that's a responsible, reasonable approach. So hopefully you can talk to the White House, and I'll be talking to them too and seeing if they would agree to something such as that.
I mean, I know the president is open to
yeah.
discussions on this topic.
Well, with that, sometimes it pays to be late. I had so many, I'm so sorry to keep this. But let me just say, I want to thank you, Madam Secretary, and your staff for being so accommodating and forthright with us and coming before and appearing before the subcommittee. Our members will have 1 week to submit questions for the record, which are due March the 29th. I would appreciate if your office could respond to those questions as soon as possible. The subcommittee meeting will be adjourned on that.